So tonight we're going to dig into one of history's most consequential and, frankly, most bizarre lab accidents. I mean, this is a story of a drug that was discovered by mistake, weaponized by people who had no idea what they were doing, worshipped by academics, and then criminalized by politicians. It's an absolutely wild ride. So let's trace the incredible journey of this one single molecule that, believe it or not, completely changed the world.
You know, this line just perfectly captures the absurdity and the sheer scale of this story. It all starts with one contaminated fingertip. And that one tiny moment goes on to spark a massive cultural revolution, insane CIA mind control plots, and medical breakthroughs that, get this, we're only now starting to rediscover.
Okay, so our story kicks off in Basel, Switzerland, way back in 1943. And I want you to meet Albert Hofmann, a chemist over at Sandoz Pharmaceuticals. Now, this guy was the absolute definition of meticulous and precise. Seriously, he was the last person on Earth you'd expect to accidentally tear a hole in the fabric of reality. He was working with fungus compounds, trying to cook up a circulatory stimulant. And the 25th version he made was called lysergic acid diethylmide 25, or as we know it, LSD 25.
So on this day, Hoffman's working with the compound again. At some point, an amount so small he doesn't even see it gets on his skin. About an hour later, his lab starts, well, breathing. Colors become incredibly intense. He goes home, lies down, and for 2 straight hours, he watches what he later called an uninterrupted stream of fantastic pictures. But here's the thing. Instead of being terrified, Hofmann, the perfect scientist, is just curious. He decides he has to do it again, but this time on purpose.
So, 3 days later, on April 19th, he sets up a controlled experiment. He figures he'll take what he assumes is just a tiny threshold dose, and he'll have his lab assistant there to observe. At 4:20 p.m., a time that would become famous for totally different reasons, he takes the dose. For about half an hour, nothing happens, and then everything happens.
So, here's the crucial detail. Hofmann had absolutely no idea what a proper dose was. He chose 250 micrograms, which is 1/4 of a milligram. In his mind, this was a conservatively small amount. Well, it turns out this is a massive dose. It's enough to not just open the doors of perception, but to blow them clean off their hinges. With reality just completely disassembling around him, he decides he's got to get home. But because of wartime fuel rationing, his only option is a bicycle. What follows is, no exaggeration, the most famous bike ride in history. As he's pedaling through Basel, buildings are melting, colors are singing, and he experiences what we now call ego dissolution. It's that feeling where the boundary between you and the rest of the universe just disappears. He was totally convinced he was either dying or going insane, but what he discovered instead was the power of a molecule that could completely dissolve the self. Back at Sandoz, they really didn't know what to do with a drug that made people meet God, but hey, they marketed it anyway. Under the brand name Delazid, they started sending out free samples to psychiatric researchers, pitching it as this cool new tool to access repressed memories. And just like that, the genie was out of the bottle, and it found its way to some very, very different kinds of people.
And this right here reveals the fundamental, almost comical misunderstanding at the heart of the CIA's interest. They saw research papers describing things like confusion and suggestibility and thought, aha, we found the perfect truth serum. What they completely failed to grasp is that a drug that dissolves your ego and connects you to the entire universe is probably the worst possible tool for an interrogation.
But that didn't stop them. Gripped by Cold War paranoia and this desperate fear that the Soviets were beating them in mind control research, the CIA launched Project MKUltra. It was run by a ruthless chemist named Sidney Gottlieb, and its goals were just chilling. They had an unlimited budget, zero oversight, and, thanks to Sandoz's free samples, warehouses full of LSD.
The experiments they ran were monstrous. In an operation with the truly absurd name Midnight Climax, the CIA set up brothels in New York and San Francisco. They paid prostitutes to bring clients back, dose them with LSD without their knowledge, and then CIA agents would just watch the chaos from behind two-way mirrors, pretending it was all science. It was a complete and utter disaster that produced zero useful intelligence, only ruined lives.
And this just brilliantly illustrates the bizarre split in LSD's early life. While the CIA was secretly trying to weaponize it for torture, one of Hollywood's biggest stars, Cary Grant, was out there publicly praising it. He took LSD over 100 times with his psychiatrist and said it helped him finally confront his childhood trauma and find self-acceptance. So in one world it was a weapon, in another it was a miracle.
So, while the CIA and Hollywood were off exploring the extremes, the drug's journey was about to take a sharp turn right into the halls of academia. Enter Timothy Leary. In 1960, he was a respectable, maybe even a little uninspired, psychology professor at Harvard. Then, on a vacation in Mexico, he tried psilocybin mushrooms and had what he called the deepest religious experience of his life. He came back to Harvard a completely changed man, totally convinced he'd found the key to consciousness itself.
He and his colleague Richard Alpert started something called the Harvard Psilocybin Project, and at first it was totally legitimate research. But after Sandoz sent them a literal mayonnaise jar full of pure LSD, the project, well, it morphed. Clinical studies turned into weekend psychedelic parties at Leary's house, and Harvard, unsurprisingly, was not thrilled that its psychology department was becoming a mystery school. So in 1963, they fired both Leary and Alpert.
But you know what? Getting fired didn't stop Leary. It totally freed him. He was no longer bound by academia, so he became a full-blown prophet for the psychedelic age. And at this huge gathering in San Francisco in 1967, he delivered the 3 Commandments slogan that would end up defining an entire generation.
So turn on meant using psychedelics to see past your everyday reality. Tune in was about using that new insight to understand your place in the universe. And drop out, this was the controversial one. It was a call to detach from all the societal pressures, conformity, ambition, the whole 9 yards. To a generation questioning the Vietnam War and 1950s values, it was absolutely electrifying. But to the establishment, it was a declaration of war.
Leary's slogan really did become the anthem for the counterculture. By the mid-60s, LSD wasn't just a drug anymore. It was the fuel for a revolution in music, art, and consciousness. You think about the Beatles, the Doors, Jimi Hendrix, their work was completely inseparable from the psychedelic experience. And for this one brief, shining moment, it really felt like a whole new world was possible.
The absolute peak was the Summer of Love in 1967. Thousands and thousands of young people flocked to San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district, trying to create this utopian society based on peace, love, and shared consciousness. But the dream just collapsed. The neighborhood was completely overwhelmed by overcrowding, crime, and predators. By the fall of that same year, the original hippies actually held a mock funeral for the movement. They called it the death of hippie.
And then came the backlash. In 1969, the horrific Manson family murders were linked to LSD all over the media. Charles Manson had used the drug to manipulate his followers, and with that, the public narrative was set. LSD leads to violence and madness. This gave President Richard Nixon all the political cover he needed to declare Timothy Leary the most dangerous man in America and launch his war on drugs, which was really aimed squarely at crushing the counterculture.
In 1970, LSD was officially classified as a Schedule I drug. That means it legally has no accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. All legitimate research just screeched to a halt. The drug went deep underground for decades, buried under this mountain of political propaganda and fear.
But it didn't just disappear. It survived in subcultures, and fascinatingly, it became a secret tool for creativity among the early tech pioneers in Silicon Valley. Steve Jobs famously called his own LSD experiences one of the 2 or 3 most important things he'd ever done. Then, in the 2000s, after decades of silence, a few brave scientists started the slow, very difficult work of bringing psychedelic research back from the political wilderness and into the lab.
And today, we are right in the middle of what people are calling a psychedelic renaissance. The huge difference now is the context. This isn't about dropping out. This is about healing within a structured, safe therapeutic framework. Top-tier institutions like Johns Hopkins and NYU are running these rigorous studies. And for some of our most stubborn mental health crises, like treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, and end-of-life anxiety, this model is showing incredible promise where a lot of conventional treatments have failed. It really seems like the therapeutic potential that Hofmann first glimpsed in 1943 is finally being explored with the seriousness it deserves.
You know, in his later years, Albert Hofmann reflected on his accidental discovery, and he called it both his problem child and his wonder child. And that is just the perfect summary, isn't it? It's a substance with this dual nature. It's capable of causing immense confusion and harm in the wrong hands, but it's also capable of facilitating profound healing and insight when it's used with respect and with intention.
The story of LSD is just this incredible collision of chemistry, culture, and politics. Its history is a powerful lesson in how fear and ideology can completely derail scientific progress for decades.
After 80 years of this wild, improbable journey, maybe the path forward isn't to fear it or to deify it, but to approach it with the same spirit Albert Hofmann did on that first fateful day, with scientific rigor, with humility, and with a deep, deep sense of curiosity.